Okay, second video, narrowing your research question. Again, another typo. Wow, how professional. Find the specific question within the broader inquiry or question that you're doing. Okay, a lot of students will start with very broad topics that need to be narrowed down a lot simply because they're asking questions that can't reasonably be answered within one semester of some summer class. So you're going to think of narrowing your research question in terms of these Russian egg dolls. I think there's a proper name for this, but I forgot what they are. The biggest one is the broader inquiry. But then within that bigger one, there's a slightly smaller one that narrows it down a little bit. Then within that one, there's an even smaller, more specific one, so to speak, and so on and so on. You want to pick the right size. I'm not necessarily saying that you have to get to the smallest, most specific thing, but you need to be within these last kind of four range, so to speak. Okay, why narrow? Just mentioned it. A narrow research question will simply help you be more persuasive because it's extremely hard to answer a broad question in this short of a time, in this short of assignment. So I have a picture of an encyclopedia here. Sometimes people are asking encyclopedic questions about a topic that's very broad that it could only take an encyclopedia to explore or answer that question that thoroughly. Here's an example. Okay, random question. I don't know why I thought of this 3 or 4 years ago when I first started teaching. If you're writing a paper for another random class, you might ask, what's the cause of teenage pregnancies? At first glance, that's it doesn't seem like a hugely broad or vague question, but it really is. I just look through Wikipedia, which is okay to use, by the way, as you're starting to do research. You don't want to cite Wikipedia. They have a section that kind of lists causational factors or causes, and here's some of them. There's four broad ones. Dropping out of high school, apparently, again, I don't know how sound this is, not knowing how about birth control, low socioeconomic status, and non-compliant behavior. Just in Wikipedia, there's gigantic sections that are headed by each of these things. In other words, there's a lot of information about each of these subtopics. So, if you were doing a video, if you're doing an essay like this, it would be helpful to pick, how does dropping out of high school lead to teenage pregnancy, or how common is that, or how do we prevent that? You want to pick one of these subtopics, one of these sub-Russian dolls within this greater Russian doll, so to speak. Okay, but it even gets more specific. It says, non-compliant behavior. I guess people that want to rebel against their parents just because they get pregnant. I guess that's the reasoning there. Even within that, there's subtopics that you could explore. Okay, so this is kind of the third Russian doll within there. So you can ask a question regarding one of these specific causational factors that leads to non-compliant behavior, which leads to teenage pregnancy. And you'd want to start your inquiry there. At what age do, teenagers get pregnant? And what does it have to do with their parents' divorce? That's a little bit better. Okay. Here's, I guess, a little bit of here's a tip for how to narrow. What I've heard is you can think of a demographic or a timeline. So a group of people in a specific place. Okay, so a better way to use this, if we were going to think about this tip regarding this topic, we'd want to specify a place. So we would say like in the United States or in Texas, for example, and then specifically pick a demographic. What about white girls from the ages of 16 to 19 in the U.S.? What's the main cause of the pregnancy for them? That's a little bit better. So that's one way to do it. I would just rather go with the general rule of thumb. Just get a sense for what you can reasonably answer. So I don't, there's different tips, theme, demographic, timeline, great. Anything that's specific enough for you to be thorough and persuasive about. Narrow it that narrow. So maybe, again, back to this Russian egg doll thing. Maybe you narrow it down 2 levels, so to speak. Give a shot at that, and if you can produce a good, strong answer that specifically, then great. If you can't answer it, then that just means you need to get more specific. So I think to figure out how to narrow, it's a guess and check thing. If you can ask a question, do some research. If you realize, oh my God, this is a bigger question than I thought, then you narrow a step. And then, if you need to narrow even more, go for it. Okay, here's a few more examples. There's just some general silly examples, and then I have one engineering example, which is kind of a joke. I think you might think it's funny. Okay, what is fascism? Very broad, open-ended thing. Maybe you just want to learn about fascism. Maybe you heard in the news that, particular presidents of the United States have been fascist, whatever your politics are. You just want to learn about it, so you want to write a paper about it, fine. But you need to get more specific. How can fascism be prevented? Okay, that's slightly more specific. Again, we're on the egg doll number 2. Here's an even better research question. What types of governmental policies enabled the rise of Hitler's fascist regime in the 1920s? So if you could look closely at this research question, again, you can pause this video at any time. I've narrowed it 3 different ways. I'm not just asking how can fascism be prevented. I'm specifically looking at a specific moment of time, 1920s and 30s, at a specific fascist regime, the Third Reich. So there's 2 ways, time and group of people. I guess that took up my first advice, think about demographic or timeline. But I'm getting specific a third way too. What types of governmental policies enabled the rise of Hitler's fascist regime? So I'm looking at German politics right before Hitler that allowed that kind of fascist takeover to happen in the first place. Okay, so there's a million ways to narrow this question. There's a billion ways to narrow that question. Here's just one way. Whatever it is for you, just narrow it a little bit. Here's 2 more examples. What is the effect of social media? Again, you can tell that these are like English 201 examples. What is the effect of social media? What is the effect of social media on teenage boys? A little better. What is the effect of Instagram? A little bit more specific, on teenage boys ages 16 to 18. Okay, maybe that's still maybe pretty broad. We could narrow it even more, but maybe we could produce a pretty good answer for that. I don't know. We'd have to go do some research and see. That's how we're going to know if we need to specify more. Okay, here's the facetious example. Just end on a joke here. Time in and time out. It's okay if you are interested in space travel to Mars. If you're curious about the engineering it's going to take to get that, it's great. No disrespect. If you are going to do that, it just needs to be more specific than this. Every semester I get this kind of memo that says, I would love to be able to figure out how to build a rocket or build a whatever it's going to help us get to Mars. Okay, it just needs to be more specific than that, because getting to Mars is obviously a gigantic enterprise, a gigantic venture to take on by yourself. You cannot do that in a one semester term project. Okay, let alone one written proposal paper. A little bit better. How are we going to engineer, or I want to propose engineering the soil, just the soil in particular, that's going to help us grow food when we get to Mars. So that's different than the ship or the voyage to Mars. That's living sustainably there. Okay, that's better. We get even better though. How to build one piece of a machine that will help us make sure that there is nitrogen in the soil when we get to Mars. See how way more specific that is than this first question? How do we live sustainably? How do we build a rocket ship to get to Mars? They're just focused on a specific piece for a specific machine that's going to help us get nitrogen in the soil so that we can have food. Okay, that's all I got. Work with me. If you're not sure this is a little bit tricky, I'm very willing to conference with you if you're not sure how to do this.